For a father, the greatest pain is not death, but the moment when he hears with his own ears his biological child mocking and despising him. He's just a foolish old man in that shabby wooden cabin. Every time I need money, all I have to do is open my mouth, and he immediately pulls out his wallet. Ridiculous. A lumberjack who only finished 7th grade but still thinks he has some value. Laughter erupted around the banquet table. His face was arrogant, triumphant, leaning back in the chair, lifting his glass of wine under the luxurious lights, like someone who had just claimed victory by humiliating his own father. His wife, his in-laws, the entire family on that side all joined in without hesitation. They ridiculed the old suit I wore at Margaret Maggie Carter's funeral, mocked the house I had built with my calloused hands, and sneered at the simple way of life I had always been proud of. I stood there, my hand clenched so tightly it drew blood. That laughter did not kill me, it awakened me. In their eyes, I was nothing more than a stupid cash machine. But from that very moment I swore, the one who dared to deceive, betray, and ridicule his own father would have to pay the price. A price they would never expect. Write your thoughts in the comments section. Press like and subscribe so you don't miss the truth behind the most painful betrayals. 5 o'clock in the morning. I didn't need an alarm clock. My body was already accustomed to that hour, a habit more persistent than my aching back, even though the years of labor had long passed. I opened my eyes and listened to the house sunk in silence. It wasn't the silence of peace, but of a heavy emptiness, as if someone had just switched off every sound. I sat up, bracing myself with my hands against the bed. My knees cracked. At 66, my body was nothing like it had been in youth. My feet touched the cold wooden floor, the mountain dampness seeping into my skin. The boards creaked under my steps, the wall clock ticked steadily, blending with the hiss of wind sneaking through the doorframe. In this house, there were no longer voices or laughter, only the weight of my breathing and the echo of the forest outside. The little mountain house wasn't big, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room, and a small woodworking shed attached. But it stood firm, just like me. I had built it with my own hands in 1980, when Margaret Maggie Carter and I had just married. Back then, wood was cheap, almost free, and since I was working at the logging site, I could easily choose the finest planks. But to bring this house into being, I had poured out sweat and toil, my calloused hands driving each nail, fitting each frame, laying down every board. Every beam, every scratch carried a story, sometimes joy, sometimes pain. There were still the marks of my child's crayons scribbled on the wall, and the faint burn on the kitchen table from the time Margaret burned the pie. Those traces had never faded. Only the people who left them behind were no longer here. 4 years ago, Margaret left me. Brain cancer came like a storm, sweeping her away from my life swiftly and mercilessly, not even giving me the chance of a proper goodbye. I still remember that last night as if etched in stone, her hand growing colder in mine, her gaze dimming like a candle flickering out. From that moment, the house held only me. At times, I still found myself listening unconsciously, waiting for the sound of her clattering dishes in the kitchen or humming the old tunes she loved. For the first year after her passing, I often talked to her as if she were still there, telling her about my day, asking for her advice, waiting for a reply. Some nights, I sat across from the empty chair, mumbling as though she still listened, before suddenly remembering, no answer would ever come again. Slowly, that habit faded, not because the pain grew lighter, but because I became accustomed to the emptiness. An emptiness that never shrinks, only lingers quietly, like a shadow stretched along the rest of my life. I went down to the kitchen. The dining table still had 2 chairs, but it had long been only me sitting there. In the past, Margaret would make coffee every morning. Now the kitchen was cold, the kettle covered with dust, and I no longer had the habit of turning it on, but this morning I did start the pot. My coffee was always strong, so strong it could be scooped with a spoon. Margaret used to scold me, saying that one day it would give me an ulcer. For more than 40 years, that prediction never came true, and now, Those scoldings were what I missed the most. I made a simple breakfast, scrambled eggs and bacon. I was never much of a cook, that had always been Margaret's domain. I dropped the eggs into the pan, clumsy and stiff. Breakfast no longer carried the rich aroma it once had when she made it, only the faint bitterness of oil, smoke, and burnt edges. I sat down, facing the empty chair, sipping the bitter coffee. And then it struck me. If I could trade it all, I would give up this entire house just to hear her call my name on the porch once more. Now, I have to do everything by myself. The cup of coffee, still hot and steaming in my hand, accompanied me as I stepped out onto the back porch. Before my eyes lay the wide valley, where the small town of Asheville, North Carolina, nestled quietly between the dark green mountains. From this hilltop, almost the entire town came into view. The main street, with its silent little shops, the church steeple rising against the sky, and the old school where David Carter once studied with its roof tiles now faded and its playground lying still in silence. It only takes 15 minutes of driving to reach the center, yet in this suburb, the world feels completely apart. The quiet is not just peaceful, it is like a heavy blanket wrapped around everything, sometimes making one feel stifled and empty. The wind threaded itself through the pine forest behind the house, whispering like the voice of the mountains, hissing softly through the needles, carrying the dampness of the morning mist that seeped into the skin. I took a deep breath. The air brought with it the resinous scent of pine, mixed with the sharp sweetness of wild berries fallen somewhere at the foot of the hill. These are the last days of September, the richest season of the mountains. During the day, the sun is still gentle, but not overly hot. At night, the air turns cool and clear, saturated with the fragrance of pine leaves, the sweetness of wildflowers, and the earthy scent of moist soil. The morning sun had just risen from behind the eastern mountains, its pale light stretching across the valley. I gazed down at that small town, once filled with countless memories, but now stirring only a sense of distance I could not quite name. Everything seemed unchanged, yet within me nothing remained whole as before. That school reminded me of the days when David was still a little boy, running out of its gates with such a radiant smile that I once believed I could hold on to that moment forever. The memory returned vividly, but instead of warming me, it only sharpened the emptiness gnawing inside. The morning bird song echoed through the forest, occasionally interrupted by the crack of a dry branch breaking somewhere, sounding like a silent warning. I stood still, my fingers tightening slightly around the coffee cup for warmth, realizing that I was clinging to this stillness as if it held an answer. But deep within, I knew that the serenity of the mountains was only a shell. Inside, a storm of loneliness surrounded me. In the backyard, there are 6 pear trees that Margaret Carter and I planted more than 40 years ago. At this season, the branches are heavy, close to harvest. In the past, it used to be a family activity. When David Carter was a child, he loved to help me. He ran around the tree trunks, picked the pears within his reach, his tiny hands gripping mine tightly as if afraid to get lost. Back then, the pear orchard was filled with laughter, and harvest time felt no different from a festival. But now, I sit alone under the pear tree, looking up at the ripe fruits falling to the ground, slowly withering away. The only sound is the rustling of leaves in the wind. For many years, David has rarely come back, always finding excuses to avoid it. Every time I call, hoping to hear a word of agreement, all I receive in return is the familiar cold voice. "I'm busy." Then follows a long silence. David is now 41 years old, my only son. He works in marketing in the city, though I don't really know the specifics of his job. He has been married to Lauren Carter for 15 years. They have no children, and both are devoting all their energy to their careers. Lauren works for a car company, and as far as I know, she is an accountant. She is intelligent, beautiful, ambitious, and completely different from the women I once knew. Polite, kind, yet there is always a trace of distance in her eyes. I once overheard Lauren whispering to David while he was on the phone with me, "Don't make it long, we still have work to do." That sentence, so light, yet enough for me to understand that in their eyes, I am nothing but an unnecessary interruption. The father-son relationship between David and me, complicated. It is not hatred, nor is it cruel, but it is not what I once thought or hoped it would be. When he was little, we were incredibly close. I took him fishing at the mountain lake, taught him how to saw wood, how to carve, and told him stories about the lumber mill. I still remember his eyes back then, wide open with admiration. I was the hero in his world. Then everything changed the day he entered college, the first in our family to achieve that. College, the city, new friends, and then Lauren. It was as if David had stepped into an entirely different world, a world where people like me with calloused hands, only 8 years of schooling, a lifetime tied to wood and forest had no place. He never said it outright, but I could feel it. I saw the way he frowned whenever I slipped out a clumsy rural phrase. I saw Lauren give an awkward smile, apologizing on his behalf whenever I shared my simple, rustic stories of life. I saw the way David avoided me, always trying to shorten our father-son encounters. There was one rare time when David invited me to his house, though we lived in the same town. I thought it was an opportunity to grow closer to my son, but when I arrived, David and Lauren rushed off to a work party, leaving me alone in a strange house, with no one to talk to, no one who needed me. Never in my life had I felt so distant from my own son as I did in that moment. Sometimes, I even suspect whether it is Lauren who replies to my messages instead of David. The words are always so short, so cold, as if written to a stranger. "Dad, you wouldn't understand." That sentence, simple as it seems, cut through me like a cold blade. Because once, just hearing me call his name, he would run straight into my arms. But now, the only thing I receive is silence. The pear orchard behind the house is still there, the branches still heavy with fruit. But I know, this year's harvest, as in recent years, will be mine alone. And each pear that falls to the ground, cracking open in silence, is like a cruel reminder. The bond between my son and me is also withering, decaying with time. I finished my cup of coffee and walked into the woodshop, the small remaining sanctuary that belonged only to me. Here lingered the raw scent of sawdust, the silence of the old saw waiting for a familiar hand, and the rough blocks of wood ready to become whatever shapes I desired. After retirement, I began carving figurines, sometimes birds, sometimes wild animals, occasionally even human faces. Nothing remarkable, only a way to keep these hands from idleness. Margaret once told me I had talent, but I knew she always exaggerated to encourage her husband. Today, I was carefully carving an eagle. Wood is a stubborn material. It resists you, but if you are patient, if you understand its grain, you can bend it to your will. I often thought, wood is like life itself. The harder it becomes, the more patience it requires to shape it. I worked for hours, fully immersed in my own world. Amid sawdust and the dim light seeping through the old window frame, I felt I belonged here. No forced smiles, no judging eyes, no awkward silences. Only me, the wood, and the whisper of memories. Exactly at 9:30, the phone rang. The sudden sound sliced through the working air. I wiped the sawdust from my hands and glanced at the screen. David Carter. Strange. He usually only called me on Sundays. "Hello," I answered, trying to mask my surprise. "Hi, Dad." David's voice sounded tense, unnatural. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine. Why are you calling midweek? Is something wrong?" He chuckled, but it was a forced laugh. "No, not at all. I just wanted to check in on you." I stayed silent. We both knew he never called just to check in. In that silence, I could clearly hear the ticking of the wall clock, drilling into the distance between father and son. At last, David sighed, as though laying down his weapons. "Actually, there's something." A brief hesitation, then he continued. "Dad, do you remember I mentioned that Lauren's parents would be visiting this weekend?" "I remember. Richard and Eleanor Whitman. I had met them twice, once at the wedding, and once at Margaret's funeral. He, a distinguished professor, always looked at me with a gaze both curious and disdainful. She was the very image of an upper-class lady, cold and refined. I still remembered clearly the feeling of being displayed in a museum, some rough specimen observed from afar. "Anyway, this time they're really coming," David went on. "Sunday evening we planned a family dinner." "I see. And you want me to attend?" There was a pause. Too long. It felt as though something serious lay unspoken. "Actually, Dad, we were planning to invite you, but there was an issue with the restaurant. We had booked Lakeview Grill, but they messed up the reservation and couldn't take us on Sunday evening." "So the dinner is canceled?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Yeah, probably. Sorry, Dad. Maybe another time, when they come again." I nodded, though he could not see. Somehow, I wasn't surprised. Every time Lauren's parents visited, there was always an excuse. They were busy, they were tired, they needed privacy, and each time I was the one left outside. "So where are they staying?" I asked. "Maybe I could drop by just to say hello." "At Blue Ridge Inn. But their schedule is really full, Dad. Lauren wants to take them shopping, walking around town. You understand?" "Yes, I understand," I said, though, in truth, I didn't understand at all. I only remembered how my late mother-in-law, Margaret's mother, whenever she visited, always sat at the table with us, no matter how busy she was. David lowered his voice, as if approaching the true reason for the call. "And one more thing. We're a bit short on the mortgage payment this month. Could you lend us $1,000? I'll pay you back as soon as I get my bonus." There it was, the real reason. I looked down at my hands, calloused, scarred with burns, lined with deep cuts from decades of sawing and carving. These hands had built this house, had fed him, had carried him into a world I was never allowed to enter. And now, these hands were remembered only when it was time to hold the checkbook. $1,000? Like the $2,000 for the car repairs last month? I asked. "Dad, you know how it is. Times are tough. The company is cutting back. The market is shaky." I cut him off. "I'll transfer it today." The silence after my reply stretched long before David answered dismissively, "Yeah, thanks, Dad. I'll pay you back, don't worry. Anyway, I've got to go. Meeting's starting." So, the cold dial tone hummed in my ear, stretching on, and the room sank once more into silence. I returned to the unfinished eagle statue, but my hands were no longer steady. My mind drifted back to the old days. The days when David was still a boy. I used to take him to the riverbank to fish, his pure laughter echoing. I remembered the afternoons when father and son built dog kennels in the workshop, the smell of wood smoke still clinging to our clothes when we came home. In the evenings, I sat by his bed reading him books, each word awkward and clumsy. Margaret was the more educated one. She had graduated from high school and even studied for 1 year at a college. She was the one who tutored David with his homework, while I only knew how to teach him how to live, how to work with my calloused hands. I still remembered his eyes back then, wide open, filled with admiration. I had once been a hero in my son's eyes. Margaret used to say, "Our son will go far," and I believed her. Indeed, David had gone far, but so far that between us now there was only a vast, unbridgeable distance. Now, the hands that once tightly held mine were busy with keyboards, with glasses of wine at luxurious parties. His world was cold offices, where the sound of typing replaced the sound of hammering from years past. A world where people talked about contracts, about stocks, about which restaurant was more luxurious. In that world, someone like me with my simple language, old clothes, and rough manners had no place. Perhaps the problem wasn't just the difference between worlds. Perhaps David was truly ashamed of me. Ashamed when I clumsily handled knives and forks in front of Lauren's family. Ashamed when I told stories from the woodshop, while they were accustomed to the language of conferences and forums. Maybe that was why I had never once been invited to a simple dinner, and certainly never had a place at their aristocratic-style parties. I sat staring at the eagle statue, its wings unfinished, as if ready to soar, but still imprisoned in the rough block of wood. I saw myself in it, once having wings to pass on to my son, but now abandoned, forgotten, no longer needed by anyone. I sighed, leaning back into the chair. Perhaps I had gone wrong somewhere. Perhaps these rough hands had taught him too much about how to survive and too little about kindness. But deep down, I still could not understand. I had given him everything: time, strength, love, faith. And yet now, every phone call revolved only around a number and amounts of money. He did not mention the day he would come back to visit me. Did not mention a dinner together. Did not mention me. I held the phone, for a moment about to press the number to call back just to hear my son's voice one more time. But I stopped. The screen was black, reflecting my old, haggard face. I put it down, and silence once again filled the room. Only the ticking of the clock remained. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Perhaps the true distance between father and son was not the miles on the road, but the dinners that never came. At noon, sunlight pierced through the kitchen window, scattering across the mottled wooden table. That light carried no warmth, only making the room feel emptier and colder. I hurriedly made myself a ham and cheese sandwich, then opened a bottle of beer. When Margaret was still alive, she never allowed me to drink beer during the day. She would laugh and take it away. But Margaret was gone, and with her, joy had left this house as well. Who cared now? Even the smallest weakness had no one left to reproach it. After eating, I decided to drive into town to buy a few groceries. The old Toyota from 1997 rested quietly under the porch's shadow. Its paint faded. Every time I started it, it felt like a negotiation with fate. If the engine roared to life, then it was another day of luck. I could easily buy a new car, my pension and savings were enough to live comfortably. But for what? This truck, like the house, was memory. On the back seat still lay the checkered blanket, the one Margaret used to pull over me during those freezing winter days. Asheville, North Carolina at noon was still the same small, peaceful, yet suffocating, because everyone knew everyone else's business. News spread like the wind, and you never truly had a secret. I stopped at Ingles Market. I picked out groceries slowly: bread, milk, eggs, a few pieces of meat. Not because I needed much, but because I wasn't eager to return to that silent house. Standing at the checkout counter, I met Carl Jenkins, the neighbor across the street. "Bill!" he exclaimed, his voice booming as if it had been ages since we last met, though we had only crossed paths yesterday. "How are you doing? I thought you were hiding away in your house." "So-so," I replied curtly. Carl was the type who talked too much, loud and intrusive, always poking into matters that weren't his. He laughed heartily and clapped me on the shoulder, the blow so hard I took a small step back. "Hey, did you hear the news? Your son's in-laws are coming to visit soon." I froze. "How do you know that?" Carl winked, reaching into my grocery bag to poke at an egg as if he didn't need permission. "Small town, Bill. Everyone knows everything. Just yesterday I saw your David at the flower shop, buying a huge bouquet for his mother-in-law. Very polite, huh?" I only nodded, my heart sinking. So David had prepared so carefully for Lauren's parents, while for me, only excuses and avoidance. "Well, finally they've decided to show up," Carl went on, his tone half joking, half mocking. "More than 10 years of marriage, and I've only seen them come here twice. Strange, isn't it?" 15 years, I corrected, and yes, this is only the second time. If it were me, I'd drag my son back. Letting him live like that, never caring about his own father, it just doesn't sit right. They have their own business. Busy. I tried to end the conversation. Carl snorted. "Busy? You really believe that excuse? People are only busy when they want to avoid you. Maybe they're busy, finding ways to erase their father from existence altogether." I stayed silent, turned away, tightening my grip around the grocery bag. Carl, unwilling to stop, continued. "Seems like you're rarely invited to their important family events either, right? You'd better be careful. Sometimes people stage everything just to cut someone out." I swallowed hard, unwilling to argue. It was pointless. Carl always thought he was right. Finally, he slapped my shoulder once more. "Well, when you see them, give them my regards, will you?" "Sure, I will," I answered, my voice choked. But deep inside, I knew the truth. There would be no chance to pass on those regards, not on this visit, and perhaps never again. That truth cut like a knife, confirming that my place in my own family was nothing more than that of an outsider. When I returned home, I put the groceries away in the kitchen and then went back to the workshop. The wooden eagle still lay unfinished on the table. I picked up the carving knife, letting the sharp edge glide over the wood as hard as steel. The work progressed slowly, but I was in no hurry. Now I had too much time, so much that it became a burden. Evening shadows gradually descended. I washed my hands, brushed away the sawdust, and sat in front of the computer in the living room. The machine Margaret had insisted I buy just 1 year before she passed away. "You need to keep up with the times, Bill," she had said, with that warm smile that now lived only in memory. The modern machine stood awkwardly in the old wooden house, cold and alien, like a lost guest. I tapped the keys, logged into the bank, and transferred $1,000 into David Carter's account. This wasn't the first time, and surely not the last. In just a few months I had sent him about $15,000, car repairs, furniture, insurance, mortgage payments. Each time he promised to pay me back, and each time he vanished into silence. I never mentioned it, partly out of pride, partly out of fear. I feared that if I brought up the money, he would stop calling me. And then this house would swallow me whole in absolute silence. I texted, "I've sent it. Call me when you receive it." Only a few seconds later the reply came, "Thanks, Dad. I'll pay you back, don't worry. Oh, I have to go into a meeting now." Dry words. Another hollow, hurried promise, stripped of any warmth of family. I set the phone down and gazed out the window. The sunset painted the sky in fiery red, while the horizon was slowly consumed by darkness. Margaret used to love sunsets like these. We would sit together on the porch, holding hands in silence, watching the evening sky. She would often whisper, "Bill, nothing is more important than family. No matter what happens, family will be there till the very end." Back then, I believed her words. Even now I still believed. Only now, it seemed my family no longer wanted to be with me. I cooked dinner for myself, fried chicken and potatoes. The meat was dry, the potatoes stiff. The meal had no fragrance, only the faint smell of grease. I chewed each bite as though I were swallowing my own loneliness. After finishing, I sat in the living room chair and turned on the television. They were playing an old western. My eyes were fixed on the screen, but my mind wandered. To David, to the call earlier, to the dinner that had been canceled. A vague suspicion crept into my heart. Why had he insisted so firmly? Why were Lauren Carter's parents always too busy to meet me, and the restaurant canceling the reservation? Was that really true? Suddenly the phone rang, its sharp sound tearing through the heavy silence of the room. I jumped. On the screen appeared the name Robert Bob Miller, an old friend, once my co-worker at the sawmill, now an IRS inspector. "Bill!" His voice rasped, still as blunt as ever. "How are you doing, old stump?" "Nothing to complain about," I answered, my voice trembling slightly. "What makes you call this late?" "Just wanted to chat a little. It's only 9 o'clock, Bob chuckled. "You've never called just to chat." Bob laughed loudly. "You caught me. Listen, want to head over to Jack of the Wood pub this Saturday night? Have a few drinks? Talk about old times." Saturday. My heart sank. David had said the dinner with his in-laws was canceled, which meant I was free. "Yeah, I suppose I can." "Good. By the way, have you heard about that new restaurant, Lakeview Grill? I hear it costs a fortune, but worth every penny." "I haven't," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But David mentioned it today." "Your son?" Bob chuckled dryly. "He must be doing quite well to eat there." "He has a good job," I quickly defended. "He deserves it." "Bill," Bob lowered his voice, sharper now. "Don't you see it? He only comes to you when he needs money. That isn't love, that's exploitation." I choked. "No, not exactly," I muttered, weak, as if lying to myself. Bob pressed on sternly. I've seen plenty of people use their aging parents. You don't want your name added to that list. Tell me, when was the last time he came by just to visit you, not to ask for money?" I fell silent. The question struck like a hammer blow. Finally, I whispered, "All right, see you Saturday night. First round's on me." We said goodbye. I set the phone down, but Bob's words still echoed in my head, weighing on me like a boulder. Deep down, I knew he was right. I turned off the television and went upstairs. The bedroom remained exactly as it had been when Margaret was alive. The nightstand with her unfinished book, the chair by the window, the clothes hanging in the closet, now covered with dust. Each object stood as a monument of sorrow, a museum of memory. I dared not touch them, fearing they might vanish along with her. I lay down on the bed. The ticking clock sounded like a countdown. My mind spun in circles. What if the dinner had never been canceled? What if David had invented the story just to exclude me from the table? The thought stabbed into my heart like a knife. My son, my own blood. Could he really be so ashamed of me that he created a lie just to avoid me? I closed my eyes, but the darkness brought no peace. The air grew thick, heavy as stone pressing on my chest. At last, I drifted into sleep. In a haze, I was drawn back to the pear orchard. Margaret stood there, her face sad yet stern, her eyes piercing into me. "Bill," she said, her voice echoing. "Our son has lost his way. He's forgotten who he is, where he comes from. What should I do, Margaret?" This time she did not shake her head. She looked straight at me, her gaze sharp as a warning. "You must wake up. Do not let your kindness turn into chains that bind you in lies. If you do, we will lose David forever." Then her figure dissolved into the cold morning light seeping through the curtains. I jolted awake, my heart pounding furiously. In the suffocating darkness, I whispered like a desperate confession, "Margaret, I don't know how much longer I can endure." The morning cast a gray shroud over the town of Asheville, North Carolina. Thick clouds hung low as if ready to collapse at any moment. A dim, murky light seeped through the kitchen window, making the room, already silent, feel even more suffocating. I had been awake nearly the entire night, tossing and turning, with only the echo of the conversation with David Carter replaying in my mind. The story about the canceled dinner had been too smooth, too rehearsed. He had answered me far too quickly, as if prepared beforehand. I rose from bed, my joints cracking, aching more than usual, as though my body too sensed the pressure of the storm closing in. I brewed a pot of strong coffee and stood by the window looking out at the apple orchard. The pear branches, heavy with fruit, bent under the damp wind. A few pears dropped heavily into the mud below, shattering just like the trust within me. Every year, David had helped me with the harvest, and together father and son would make pear cider using my father's old recipe. But now, the work remained only for me. After a quick breakfast of scrambled eggs and dry toast, I decided to drive into town to buy a new jigsaw blade. The old Toyota, 1997, coughed and sputtered, stalling twice. I patted the steering wheel gently, whispering as though to an old friend, "Come on, don't leave me now." On the third try, the engine finally roared to life. The center of town had hardly changed in more than 3 decades. The familiar pharmacy at the corner, the barber shop I had visited every month. Yet now there were a few new stores, and among them, the Lakeview Grill, the very restaurant David had mentioned. I glanced at it briefly, but an ominous feeling rose in my chest. After buying supplies at Lowe's Hardware, I heard a familiar voice call from behind me. "William Carter, I can't believe it." I turned. It was Edward Collins, an old colleague, now retired. He looked trim, younger than his years. "Edward." I shook his hand. "It's been a long time. At least 3 years," he chuckled. "How are you and Margaret doing these days?" I lowered my eyes. Bad news never traveled as far as we thought. Margaret passed away 4 years ago. Cancer. Edward's face fell, his hand squeezing my shoulder gently. "I'm truly sorry, my friend. If only I had known sooner. It's all right. Life goes on." We stood in silence for a moment. Then Edward shifted the subject. And how about David? That boy was always bright. He's doing fine. Works for a marketing company. He's married now. Edward nodded thoughtfully. That's right. Just yesterday, I saw him with his wife and her parents at the Lakeview Grill. They looked like they were celebrating something. I froze, my body rigid. The veins in my temples felt like they would burst, my heart pounding against my ribcage. Yesterday? At the Lakeview Grill? I asked, my voice tightening. Yes. Susan and I drove past, and we could see clearly through the windows. I even thought of stopping by to say hello, but I didn't want to intrude on a family gathering. The rustle of the shopping bag in my hand grew louder as my knuckles turned white from clenching. David had lied. Not only lied, but crafted an entire story. Are you certain it was David? I clung to the last thread of hope. Edward looked slightly puzzled. Of course, he looks just like you did when you were young, except without the beard. And that mole on his right cheek? Unmistakable. That was it. The end. I nodded, forcing a smile. Thank you, Edward. It was good to see you again. But as I walked away, a cold fury brewed within me, silent, merciless. Back home, I dropped the shopping bag on the kitchen table and immediately dialed David's number. The phone rang. Beep, beep, then voicemail. David, it's your father. Call me back immediately. Half an hour passed. Nothing. I called again. Straight to voicemail. David, this is important. Call me back. Another 30 minutes slipped by. Silence. I sent a message. We need to talk. Urgent. No reply. I knew he saw it. He always had his phone with him. But he chose to ignore me. By noon, the rain poured down. The pounding on the tin roof echoed like relentless hammers, filling the house with a dull roar. Through the window, I watched the pairs splattering into the mud. My mind replayed old memories. The leaking roof, hospital bills, the broken water heater. Each time it had been about money, each time it had been promises made, then forgotten. All of it lies. The phone rang. David. Hello, Dad, he said, his voice casual. You called me? What's the matter? I drew in a deep breath. I ran into Edward Collins today. He told me last night he saw you at the Lakeview Grill with Lauren and her parents. Silence. A silence heavy as stone. Finally, David spoke. Dad, there are things you don't fully understand. I can't explain everything over the phone. Try, I snapped. Explain. Yes, we stopped by, but it was just spontaneous because we had just picked up my in-laws from the airport. It wasn't planned. Spontaneous? I gripped the phone tighter. You called me at 6 o'clock to cancel dinner. An hour later, you were raising a glass with them. Dad, there must be some misunderstanding. I said Sunday, that there wasn't enough space that day, but actually yesterday was Friday. And I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable. I thought, maybe you'd feel out of place at that dinner, so I made it easier this way. Not wanting me uncomfortable or ashamed to have me at the same table? You're overthinking it. It was just a meal. No, David. Every time you borrowed money, you promised to repay, and every time it was a lie. And now, even a simple family dinner, you spin a story just to cut me out. Do you think your father is that stupid? Dad, I intended to tell the truth, but I didn't get the chance. Enough! I roared. Every word you speak makes me sicker. My son, nothing more than a polished liar. I hung up, my hand trembling violently, veins bulging as though I could crush the phone in my grip. That evening, I called the Lakeview Grill. Hello, Lakeview Grill. How may I help you? A receptionist answered. Can you check if there's a reservation under the name David Carter for this coming Sunday night? One moment, please. The sound of typing. Yes, there is a reservation, 6:30 p.m., table for 6. I clenched the receiver. And what about yesterday? Yes, 9 p.m., also a table for 6, under the name David Carter. No cancellation, no changes. That was it. The truth laid bare. Not only had he lied about last night, but Sunday's dinner was still intact, only without me. I set the phone down, my heart filled with an icy rage. Yet alongside it, a steel-hard resolve began to shine. On Sunday night, I would go to the Lakeview Grill, MTI. I would walk in, look them straight in the eyes, and then, no lie could shield them anymore. Outside, the rain eased, leaving only a mist that drifted in the air. I gazed out at the waterlogged pear orchard, the branches sagging under their unseen weight. Within me, determination rose heavy and certain, just like the storm that had just passed. It was time to confront, time for the truth to be exposed, no matter how bitter it might be. Sunday evening arrived like a fateful trial. I had spent the entire day in heavy anticipation, ears straining at every tick of the clock like hammers striking my heart. I tried to keep myself busy, fixing the leaky faucet, trimming the hedge, even attempting to carve a few wooden chess pieces. But all of it was just an excuse. My mind circled endlessly around a single thing. Tonight. At exactly 5:30, I began to prepare. I bathed, shaved clean, and put on a white shirt and the same suit I had last worn at Margaret's funeral. It now hung loose, draping over my gaunt frame. Before the mirror, I hesitated with the tie. Too formal, too false. In the end, I only polished the old black shoes, their leather cracked, but still able to catch a faint shine under the lamp. Looking into the mirror, an old man with silver hair, wrinkled face, and tired eyes stared back. A man who had sacrificed his whole life, now reduced to a shadow his own son wanted to hide away. At 6 o'clock, I drove into town. The night was calm, the streets sparse, amplifying my loneliness. I parked the car 1 block away from Lakeview Grill, not wanting David to notice me by chance. The restaurant glowed at the corner of Maple and Pine, its golden lights spilling onto the dark street like another world I never belonged to. Through the enormous windows, I could see almost the entire room, bright, noisy, filled with wine and laughter. I stood there, watching the minutes drag. At 7:05, David's gleaming silver SUV pulled up to the front. He and Lauren stepped out, dazzling, elegant, as though attending their own wedding. Behind them came Lauren's parents, proud, polished, the pearl necklace around her mother's throat gleaming. Then Thomas, Lauren's brother, laughing boisterously with his wife Rachel at his side. 6 people, exactly enough for the reservation, and not a place for me. A waiter in a black vest bowed and guided them to a table by the window. I crossed the street and hid behind a large potted plant. From there, every detail was clear. David spoke animatedly, hands gesturing like a successful businessman. Lauren leaned close to him, smiling softly. Her parents sat upright, their faces radiating approval. Thomas kept cracking jokes, his coarse laughter echoing. A perfect family dinner. A family but not mine. I turned away, inhaling deeply. No, I would not stand outside like some beggar at the door. I had to see it with my own eyes. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The young hostess greeted me coldly. "Do you have a reservation, sir?" "No," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "A table for one, if available." She gave me a quick once-over, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "I'm sorry, all tables are fully booked. You could leave your number if you'd like." I was about to walk out when I noticed the bar at the far end of the room. "Can I sit there?" "Yes, sir." I walked to the bar, choosing a seat tucked away but still with a view of David's table. The bartender, head shaved, tattoos snaking down his arm, set a glass of whiskey with ice in front of me. "Looks like it's going to be a long night for you," he said, half joking, half serious. I only nodded and took a sip. The whiskey burned down my throat, like poison numbing the heart, so it would not feel the betrayal unfolding before me. My eyes stayed fixed on their table. Plates of food arrived, arranged artfully. David's father-in-law raised his glass, the entire table clinking in unison, their laughter ringing out like mockery of my existence. Lauren handed her phone to her parents, both nodding proudly. David placed a hand on his wife's shoulder, whispered something in her ear, his smile confident, assured. A perfect family, but not my family. I drank more, swallowing down the lump in my throat. Perhaps I was mistaken. Perhaps this was just a business gathering. But then my eyes froze. David pulled out his wallet and slapped down a thick golden credit card. I recognized it instantly, the card I had given him more than a year ago, meant only for emergencies. My vision blurred. They had not only excluded me from their dinner, they were raising their glasses, laughing, feasting on my money. I drained the glass of liquor. The burn scorched my throat, but what seared me 1,000 times more was that scene. I was about to call for the check when I suddenly realized the entire table across the room was fixed on David. He stood tall, his voice loud, boasting in drunken pride. I couldn't catch the words clearly, but a sharp instinct urged me to rise, lay a few bills on the counter, and slowly head toward the restroom, which happened to be right beside their table. I slowed my steps, ears straining, catching every word as I passed. David's voice rang out, rising above the clatter of knives and forks. "He's nothing but a foolish old man in that shabby wooden shack. Every time I need money, all I have to do is open my mouth and he pulls out his wallet right away. Ridiculous, a lumberjack who never went past 7th grade still thinking he has any worth. And imagine this, he actually believes I'll ever pay that money back." The whole table erupted in laughter. The harsh sound sliced into me. "You're terrible," Lauren cut in, but her tone sparkled with admiration, not reproach. "But you have to admit, it's all his fault. He's the one who forced himself to help us." "How many times have you heard him say this?" David mocked my voice, exaggerating it into something crude and rustic. "Do you need money, son? For God's sake." They burst out laughing again. Thomas raised his glass, sneering. "Truth is, he has no other value except for his wallet." I felt as if the ground cracked open beneath me, ready to swallow me whole. "Do you remember that awful suit he wore at the wedding?" Lauren smirked. "My God, Mother nearly fainted," Eleanor added with venom, "as if he dug it out from the 1980s. David curled his lips. "That's his going out suit. My wedding, my graduation, even my mother's funeral, always the same one." "So touching," Eleanor mocked. Richard, Lauren's father, leaned back in his chair, his voice cold. "Honestly, I can't imagine introducing him to my friends at the club. A professor with an in-law who's just an uneducated old man? No, thank you." The laughter exploded again. My fists clenched so tight blood pricked through my skin. Each word was a nail hammering down the coffin lid, burying every memory of father and son. "And the way he eats," Eleanor went on. "Remember that dinner after Margaret's funeral? I nearly froze when I saw him, cutting lettuce with a knife." Lauren pretended to defend me, but her voice was muffled with laughter. "Come on, Mother. He grew up in another world. At least he tries." "Yeah." David lifted his glass, dripping with contempt, especially when it comes to his wallet. "You wouldn't believe it, just this week he sent me $1,000 to pay the mortgage, and here we are, feasting with that very money." He clinked his glass. The whole table joined in, gleefully raising theirs in unison. "Here's to the generosity of the most naive father in the world." The laughter roared again, echoing like a public trial of humiliation. My chest tightened, pounded as if with a hammer. I could no longer breathe. "Are you all right?" A waiter passing by stopped, noticing me frozen in place, and asked with concern. I jolted. "Yes, fine, just thinking." I nodded slightly. "Where's the restroom?" He pointed the way. I dragged my steps, trying to avoid the eyes from their table. In the restroom mirror, what stared back was a stranger with red, swollen eyes. Not a father, not a husband, just an old man betrayed. How could he have been so wrong? About his own son? The eyes in the mirror seemed to ask. Cold water dripped from my chin onto my shirt, but I didn't notice. In my head, that cutting laughter still resounded, every word drowning me deeper in shame. I stepped back out, catching a glimpse of their table now being served an elaborate dessert. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the smug glances. I turned away, quickly heading for the exit. Glancing back one last time, I saw them like a happy, close-knit family. A true family built on deceit, mockery, and my blood. Out on the street, I drew a deep breath of the night air. But even the freshness could not wash away the dizziness. I walked toward my car, every step weighed down as though carrying a mountain. Inside the car, I sat in silence. The town sparkled with lights. like countless stars fallen to earth. I had once loved this place where I met Margaret, where I built a home, raised David, but now every memory drowned beneath one truth. My only son saw me as nothing but an ATM. My daughter-in-law felt ashamed. My in-laws held me in contempt. I started the engine, driving aimlessly. On the way home, I stopped at the overlook. The town shimmered below, beautiful in its cruelty. Every light a taunt. You are nothing but an outsider. Something heavy surged within my chest. No longer pain, no longer tears, but a fire, resentment, rage, and a cold, unyielding strength. Back home, I switched on the light, grabbed the bottle of liquor, poured a glass, but this time, I didn't drink to forget. I drank to remember, each sip a flame forging me into steel. I sat in the darkness, gazing out at the pear orchard. The branches hung heavy like silent sentinels. My whisper was icy. I will never forget tonight, just as I will never forget this humiliation. In that moment, a new man rose within me, no longer the weak father, but someone ready to make them pay. I drained the glass of whiskey, letting the stream of fire scorch its way down my throat before slamming the glass hard onto the table. The sound of glass striking wood echoed through the dark kitchen, like a tolling bell that signaled both an ending and a beginning. Stepping into the study, I switched on the old desk lamp. Its faint yellow glow fell across the wooden surface, illuminating every scratch time had left behind. I opened the computer. The screen lit up coldly, so different from the warmth Margaret Carter once brought into this room. I logged into the bank's website. The numbers appeared clearly. The balance in the account, the result of an entire lifetime of sweat and blood. I scrolled to the credit card management section. Under the list, one name stood out, filling me with both pain and fury. David Carter. My fingers trembled on the mouse. With just one click, his card would be frozen. Every party, every lavish expense cut off instantly. But I stopped. Number. That would be too simple, too easy. He would only frown for a few days, then find another way to bleed me dry. I wanted more than that. I wanted them to remember. I wanted my humiliation today to become their humiliation tomorrow. I drew in a long breath, then closed the bank website. My eyes paused at the corner of the desk, where the old phone book still lay. The spine was frayed, its pages yellowed, recording names and numbers from a long-gone time. I flipped through the pages until I stopped at the letter M. Robert Bob Miller. An old friend, once shoulder to shoulder with me at the sawmill, before taking a different path. 22 years ago, Robert joined the IRS, the federal tax agency, a straightforward man, sometimes rough, but never wrong when it came to judging people. He had warned me many times, "Bill, that boy is using you. He sees you as nothing more than a walking wallet." Back then, I didn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. But tonight, after what I had witnessed with my own eyes, I knew Robert had been right from the very beginning. I picked up the landline phone. My hand clenched the receiver, my finger tracing over the familiar digits. Each long beep, beep, rang out, pounding in my chest like a hammer striking down. Then, a raspy but familiar voice cut through, firm and direct. Robert Miller speaking. I closed my eyes, exhaling a heavy breath. "Robert, it's me, Bill. Sorry to call you so late." There was a brief silence. Then his tone softened. "Bill? It's been a long time. What's going on? Are you all right?" I tilted my head back toward the ceiling, where the desk lamp flickered like a flame on the verge of burning out, and for the first time in many years, I let go of the hardened shell I had carried. "No, Robert, I am not all right." My voice caught, rough yet resolute. "I need your help. This time, I truly need it. But never mind. I'll call you tomorrow, and then we'll meet." Dawn rose, but it carried no warmth. The pale light pierced through the curtains like cold blades, cutting into my eyes. The room was silent, scattered with rolling liquor bottles, a cup of coffee gone cold from the night before. Yet nothing compared to the pain gnawing at my soul, the pain of betrayal by my own son. My head pounded like hammers from the alcohol, but the humiliation was far worse. The memories of the restaurant last night rushed back, the gloating laughter, the venomous mockery, the overflowing contempt. Those sounds seared into my heart like acid, dripping, never closing. I looked out into the pear orchard. The trees were heavy with fruit, nearing harvest season, but my heart was empty. In the old days, David once held my hand as we climbed the ladder to pick the first fruits, his laughter ringing pure and clear. Now, that image only made the bitterness sting deeper. That child was gone. In his place stood a stranger, selfish and deceitful. I swallowed a painkiller, sipped strong coffee, and dialed Robert Bob Miller. He picked up after the second ring. Robert Miller speaking. "Robert, it's me, William. Sorry for calling early." "William, are you kidding? I've been up since 5:30, you know that. But what was that thing you mentioned last night?" I hesitated for a second, then decided not to hide anymore. "No, Robert, I'm not all right. And you were right. About David, you were right from the beginning." There was silence for a few seconds on the other end. Then his voice lowered. "What did he do?" I told him everything. Every lie, every exploitation, every mocking laugh at the dinner table. How he used the credit card I had given him for emergencies to treat his wife's entire family. How the whole table raised their wine glasses in ridicule. Robert never interrupted, only listened, letting me pour it all out. When I finished, he exhaled sharply, then swore curtly, just like in the old sawmill days. "Damn it, I told you, William, he's just using you." "I know. Now I know. But back then, I was blind." "You weren't blind. You were his father. Every father wants to believe the best in his child." I gave a bitter laugh, eyes fixed on the window. "And what do I get in return? A son who makes his father into a joke." I heard my own voice tremble, but it was not weak. "Robert, I can't go on like this. I want him to learn a lesson, not just cutting off the money that's too easy. I want him to pay. I want him to remember forever." Robert's voice grew stern. "All right, then let's meet. This isn't something we should say over the phone. Moose Cafe, half an hour." I arrived first. Moose Cafe, a small diner on the edge of Asheville, North Carolina, where the smell of pancakes mingled with the laughter of early workers. There was never a place here for braggarts like David and Lauren. I chose a table near the window, ordered coffee, and let the bitterness spread down my throat. Robert walked in, trim figure, silver hair, eyes sharp and cold. He shook my hand firmly. "William, you look terrible. Last night was hell." I figured. He ordered 2 plates of pancakes. When the waitress left, Robert leaned forward, lowered his voice. "I've been thinking all the way here. Before I say anything, answer honestly. Do you want a punch to vent your anger, or a sentence he'll never forget?" I looked straight into his eyes. This time, no trembling. "A sentence. I've been foolish long enough. Now it's his turn to pay." Robert nodded. "Then listen carefully. 22 years at the IRS, I've seen every kind of fraud. And the most common one is children claiming tax deductions through elderly parent care expenses. You understand what I mean?" I frowned. "Not really. It's simple. They claim expenses for medicine, nursing, medical equipment, to reduce taxes, but many fabricate them, and I'm sure David has done exactly that. Do you remember last year he gave you some papers to sign, saying they were from his company's accounting department?" An image flashed in my mind. David handing me papers, smiling awkwardly. I had signed without reading, trusting him. I remember. "That's the trick. He used your name to commit tax fraud, and you know how the IRS deals with tax fraud." My hand tightened around the coffee cup, the faint crack of ceramic sounding. Blood rushed to my face. Each breath felt trapped in my chest. "What do you want me to do?" Robert enunciated every word, like hammering nails. 1. Freeze every credit card he has access to. 2. Gather all the evidence, transfers, dates, reasons. 3. Submit a full report to the IRS, confirming you were never supported, never required special care, and never agreed to let him use your name on tax records. And the result? Robert cut into his pancake, chewed slowly, then said, "A full audit. Many years of records, every account, every transaction. If it's as I think, and I'm certain, it means David and Lauren will face a massive fine, maybe even probation, and more importantly, reputation, career, dignity, gone." I saw the scene unfold. IRS agents in black suits pounding on David's door, rifling through documents, questioning relentlessly, Lauren panicking, David speechless. I saw justice. "Harsh," I whispered. Robert's voice hardened. "Harsh? And what about what he did to you? He drained your money, he humiliated you, he made you into a laughingstock. This isn't revenge, this is a sentence, this is justice. And he deserves it." I sat silent. The sweet smell of pancakes drifted around, but in my throat there was only bitterness. I pushed the plate aside, my eyes cold as steel. If he sees me as a tool, then now I will become his sentence. Robert nodded slowly. "The IRS doesn't knock, William, they pound. And when they enter, no one escapes." I took a deep breath. My heart no longer trembled. Only a block of cold ice remained. "Then let's begin. I want David to know. Betraying his father is the heaviest sentence of his life." Outside Moose Cafe, the morning sun still shone bright, but in my eyes, the whole world was only the ashen gray of a storm gathering fast. "The bank," Robert Bob Miller said, his voice firm. "Call right now and freeze all the cards he might use. From this moment on, every step he takes will be tangled in the very web he wove himself." I pulled out my phone, my hand trembling yet steady in its resolve. The cold glow of the screen lit up my face, etching deep the lines of age and pain. I dialed the bank. The waiting music rang in my ear, each note stabbing like needles. At last, a young female voice answered. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. How may I assist you today?" I glanced at Robert. He moved his lips silently. "Lost. I want to cancel the supplementary credit card under my son's name, David Carter," I said slowly. "That card is lost, perhaps stolen." "I understand, sir. Please confirm your identity with a few questions." I answered each one, my tone steady, but my heart pounded like hammers striking. After a few minutes, the clerk confirmed. "The card has been successfully locked. Would you like to issue a new replacement card?" "No," I replied, my voice hard as steel. I hung up. Across the table, Robert nodded, his eyes cold yet resolute. "Good. Now he can't drain you any further. And when he tries, when the transaction is denied, he will be thrown off balance. He may call you. What will you say?" I gripped the phone tightly in my hand. I want to pour it all out, the humiliation, the betrayal, the agony of being used, but I must restrain myself. "I think I will tell the truth." Robert shook his head, his voice unwavering. "No, William. If you do that, he'll have time to prepare. He'll forge more papers, fabricate legitimacy for his tax filings. You only say there were unusual transactions, so you froze the card for safety. The bank is handling it. Nothing more specific." I frowned. "Deceit? All my life I've been straightforward. If something was wrong, I would say it outright. The thought of pretending, of scheming, it goes against everything I am." "And what about being exploited and mocked?" Robert countered, his eyes sharp as blades. "This isn't deceit. This is a counterstrike, cold, calculated, but just. If you want this plan to succeed, you must act like a strategist, not a weak father." I swallowed hard. Within me, two bloodlines, fatherly love and the thirst for justice, were at war. But only one could win. I nodded, this time without hesitation, as though fate itself had struck the gavel. "All right, I'll do it your way." Robert drained his coffee cup, set it down, and said, "The next step is paperwork. We need to prepare a filing for the IRS. Come to my home. I'll help you draft it properly. Once this is submitted, the wheels of justice will turn, and nothing will stop them." We left Moose Cafe. Outside, the day blazed bright but cut cold like a knife, sunlight pouring down yet unable to warm the frost within my heart. His home stood on the outskirts, small, neat, and orderly like the man himself. His wife had passed from kidney failure, the same wound of life I bore. Perhaps this loss bound us, two widowers who understood each other without words. In his study, crowded with books on law and finance, Robert handed me the forms. We sat across from one another, the golden light from the window falling on the white paper. But my face held only shadow. "You'll need complete bank statements from the past years," Robert explained, "to prove money went from you to him, never the other way around." "I have them all. I keep them in a separate file." "Good. You'll also need medical records, to show the IRS that you are perfectly healthy, requiring no special care," as he claimed. "I go for annual checkups. My doctor always says I'm healthy for 66. That proves he fabricated everything. The IRS will not be lenient." The pen trembled in my hand, but the strokes were decisive verdicts written, irreversible. I lifted my head, my voice breaking. I never thought the day would come, that I'd have to do this against my own son. Robert looked at me, not just as an IRS investigator, but as a friend. He pressed my shoulder gently. "You're not against him, you're upholding justice. This is the final lesson a father can teach his son. Every action carries a price." A heavy silence draped the room like stone. The clock ticked, the pen scratched, the coffee cup clinked witnesses to my decision. At last, I nodded. If he sees me as a tool, then now I will become his judgment. By late afternoon, the documents were complete. Robert stacked them neatly, his gaze solemn. "Tomorrow you will submit them in person. Once submitted, the wheels will not stop." He brought out a bottle of aged whiskey, pouring 2 glasses. "To justice," he said, raising his glass. "To justice. And to those who thought I was merely easy prey." I clinked mine against his. The liquor was fine, smoky with hints of honey. Yet in my chest, all I tasted was justice. The phone rang. Each chime pierced like a knife into my chest. The name David flashed. I looked at Robert. He gave a slight nod. "Remember, say nothing specific." I picked up. "Hello? Dad, the card's not working. What did you do?" David's voice was sharp. "There were some unusual transactions. I locked it for safety. The bank is handling it." "What transactions? Why didn't you tell me first?" "It was unexpected. They said it will be resolved within a few days. I need it urgently. I was going to buy a gift for Lauren, her birthday. Her birthday was in January, still 4 months away." Another lie, blatant and crude. "Is that so?" I replied evenly. "Then you'll just have to wait. Or use your own card." It doesn't work with that website." "Fine, just keep me updated." I ended the call, not in anger, but in icy calm. "He lied again," I told Robert. "See? Deceit is his instinct. But this time, he won't escape." I nodded, my eyes burning with a fierce light. "Yes, what I'm doing is right. Perhaps merciless but just." The sky blazed, clear and bright. Sunlight streamed down, yet it could not thaw the chill in my heart. The clock ticked, marking the rhythm of a trial about to begin. Today was the day justice would start its march. Robert had said it well. The IRS doesn't knock on doors, they pound them down, and when they come in, no one escapes. I clutched the file in my hand. Within me, fatherhood had died. Only justice remained justice, and the verdict destined for David. I chose Lakeview Grill, the very restaurant where, 2 weeks earlier, I had accidentally overheard the mocking laughter of my son and his wife's family. And I chose the time of 7:45 in the evening, the peak dinner hour, when the restaurant would be most crowded. Perhaps many people would say I was being petty. Perhaps I could have chosen a more private place, sparing David the humiliation of public shame. But I remembered every cruel word of ridicule, the old-fashioned suit, the modest wooden house, the rustic manners. I remembered David calling me a foolish old man, easily deceived. And I understood then that the public nature of this confrontation was an essential part of the lesson. Last night, I had called David. I told him I wanted to apologize for the misunderstanding about the credit card, that everything had been resolved smoothly. I said I wished to make amends with an elegant dinner to celebrate reconciliation at Lakeview Grill. The surprise in his voice was almost tangible. "Dad, Lakeview Grill? Dad, that's an expensive place." "I know," I replied, "but sometimes one must allow himself a little luxury, especially to mark a new beginning. Bring Lauren along. I reserved a table for 3. He agreed, though his tone still carried suspicion. I did not add that in truth I had reserved a table for 7 o'clock, a round table large enough for 6, the 3 of us and 3 special guests. That entire day, I did nothing but prepare myself mentally. I changed clothes several times, torn between trying to appear worthy or simply being myself. In the end, I wore again the very suit they had mocked. It was a little loose, a little outdated, but it was me. To show them I did not need to change to please anyone. At exactly 6:30, Robert Bob Miller was waiting at the street corner under the dim yellow light. "Nervous?" he asked, gripping my hand firmly. "A little," I admitted. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from anticipation. "Everything is ready. Michael Anderson from the IRS and his associate are already seated at the next table. Officers Daniel Reed and Karen Lopez will arrive at 7:05. You'll have a few minutes face-to-face before they appear." I nodded. Robert looked deep into my eyes, as if to ask one last time, "Are you certain? It's still not too late to stop." I inhaled deeply, then shook my head. I want them to understand that one cannot exploit and betray without consequence, especially not when it is their own family." Robert patted my shoulder. "All right, then let's go." At 7 sharp, David and Lauren arrived. David looked polished in his tailored suit, his hair slicked back with shine. Lauren was elegant in a fitted dress, jewelry glittering under the restaurant's lights. Beautiful, successful, but all of it felt hollow and false. "Dad," David smiled, stepping closer, "you came too early." "I didn't want to be late," I answered, embracing him. The first embrace in which I felt no love left, only revulsion. "Hello, Dad." Lauren smiled, placing a polite kiss on my cheek. The young manager stepped forward, his tone cheerful. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, under the name Carter." "A table for 6? David turned to me, surprised. "6? Did you invite others?" "You'll find out soon enough," I replied calmly. The manager led us to the large round table in the center of the dining room, visible from every direction, exactly as I had requested. I sat opposite David and Lauren, watching the flicker of tension in their eyes. "Dad," David began, forcing a smile, "you said you wanted to celebrate because the credit card issue was resolved?" "That's right," I nodded, "but not in the way you think." I glanced at my watch. 7:03. Almost time. I leaned back, eyes locked on David. "I know everything. I know about that dinner a few nights ago, where you and Lauren's family laughed at me. I know you used my credit card to pay. I know you inflated the expenses of my care on your tax returns for years, and I know about the 3 loans of $30,000 each in my name with forged signatures." David's face shifted from shock to pale terror, then strained composure. "Dad, I don't understand what you're saying." "Stop lying!" I snapped. People at nearby tables began to glance over. "I heard it all. Right here in this very restaurant, when you called me a naive old fool, when Lauren mocked my old suit, when her father called me an uneducated carpenter. Enough." Lauren clenched her napkin, her face drained of color. "Dad, you misunderstood. For the first time in years, I understand perfectly. You have exploited me, stolen from me, mocked me behind my back, and even committed fraud against the government." At that moment, 4 figures approached our table. Robert, Michael Anderson, the senior IRS investigator, and 2 plainclothes officers. David froze. "Dad, what is this? Who are they?" "The price to be paid, my son," I replied. Michael Anderson opened a folder. "Mr. David Carter, I am Michael Anderson with the IRS. These are officers Daniel Reed and Karen Lopez from the Asheville Police Department. You are under investigation for tax fraud, forgery, and identity theft. Evidence shows you falsely claimed $12,000 per year in caregiving expenses for your father over several years and forged power of attorney to take out 3 loans of $30,000 each in his name. The air turned heavy as lead. The entire restaurant fell silent. A few guests raised their phones to record. Officer Daniel Reed stepped forward. "Mr. David Carter, you are under arrest on suspicion of fraud and forgery. You have the right to remain silent." David stood stunned, then suddenly glared at me with searing hatred. "It was you. You did this. You betrayed your own son." "No, David." I shook my head. "It was you who betrayed your father. You deceived me, ridiculed me, turned me into your personal cash machine. So tell me, who is the real betrayer?" Lauren broke down in tears. Officer Karen Lopez spoke gently. "Mrs. Carter, you'll need to come with us as well. Your name appears in the accomplice records." "No, I didn't know anything about those loans, I swear," Lauren screamed. David whipped toward her. "You're the one who suggested we cheat on the taxes." "No, it was you. You said everyone does it." They argued, blaming each other right there in front of everyone. I watched, and inside I felt none of the satisfaction I had once imagined, only a vast emptiness, as though a piece of my soul had been torn away. Justice had been served, but the price was not only David's to pay, it was also mine, the price of a father who had forever lost his son. The officers escorted David Carter and Lauren Carter out of the restaurant, each heavy step dragging along the weight of their guilt beneath the piercing gaze of the crowd. The whispers rose in waves, yet in my ears they echoed like invisible knives, cutting into my pride. I caught a fleeting image of the little boy who once ran playfully through the pear orchard, now dragged away in handcuffs like a stranger. Michael Anderson lingered, placing his hand on the table, his voice calm yet full of gravity. "Mr. Carter, you need to be present at the IRS office tomorrow to provide an official statement. After that, if the prosecutor decides, there may be a trial." I asked, my voice trembling. "Will it really come to that?" He shrugged, his eyes revealing nothing. "Hard to say. Many cases end in a deal with the prosecutor. For a first offense, if full restitution is made, your son may only face a fine and probation. But the final decision is not mine." I nodded, but silently thought, probation or prison no longer matters. What matters is that my son has long been dead to me. When Anderson left, only Robert, Bob, Miller, and I sat quietly at the table. The restaurant slowly returned to normal. The white linens were straightened, the waiters resumed pouring wine, but it was all a fragile pretense, like glass already cracked. The lively sounds outside stood in stark contrast to the emptiness weighing heavily inside me. Robert looked at me, his gaze piercing. "You just signed the death sentence for the bond between father and son. That will haunt you forever, Bill. Can you bear it?" I swallowed hard, answering like a man just returned from the battlefield. "I don't know. I feel as if I've won a war, but the reward is losing everything." We stood, paid for the unfinished drinks, and walked out. The sky tonight was filled with stars, a beauty so cruel it seemed to mock my loss. We silently made our way to Jack of the Wood pub, the shabby bar where our youth had once been tied together. The old wooden door creaked, the dim yellow lights coated in the dust of memory, the smell of liquor and rotting wood lingered in the air. In that atmosphere, I felt memory and decay coexisting. We chose a hidden corner. The television on the wall was showing a baseball game, the patrons in the bar cheering loudly. As for me, I sat there, immersed in sadness. Robert took his first sip of whiskey and quietly said, "Bill, you know, when my wife passed, I thought that emptiness would consume me. But then I realized, emptiness is not the end. It is just land left fallow, waiting for a new season of sowing." I looked down at my hand holding the glass. This very hand had signed the report that turned my son into a criminal. It trembled slightly, and I whispered like a prayer, "Margaret, will you forgive me for bringing our son to this point?" Robert placed his hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently, his voice firm. "Bill, family isn't always blood. Family is those who don't mock you behind your back, those who stand beside you when you collapse. And I will always be your family. I looked up and saw in my old friend's eyes not only the rationality of an investigator, but also genuine friendship. I raised my glass, my voice choked. Thank you, Bob, for being my true family. We clinked glasses. The sharp sound rang out, but within me, it echoed like a funeral bell. That night, we sat until the bar closed. I did not cry, for a man must not collapse here. But deep in my heart, I knew I had just buried everything, the bond of fatherhood, in my final illusions. When I returned home, I lifted my eyes to the brilliant night sky, but within me there was only darkness. I stepped into the house, the shack on the hill, as David once mocked, hung up my coat, poured a glass of water, then stood gazing out into the garden. The gnarled pear trees appeared under the moonlight, silent witnesses to both the joys and tragedies of my family. This year, I would harvest alone. That harvest would be nothing less than a funeral for the family I had lost, but I would still do it. Because in the end, I had liberated myself, liberated from illusions, from blind loyalty, and from the kind of fatherly love that had turned me into prey for mockery. I whispered into the darkness, I have freed myself, but the price is losing forever my only son. And in that moment, I understood. True revenge was not bringing David to trial, but daring to face the naked truth that I had lost him long ago. If this story resonated with you, make sure to hit like to show your support, subscribe so you won't miss the unexpected twists to come, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Every word from you is the motivation that keeps us telling stories of justice and truth. And don't forget, the next chapter is waiting for you right now in the box on the left of your screen. Thank you for being here with us.